The first thing that hit me was the cold. Not the polite kind that clings to your coat when you come in from November wind, but the kind that lives in old drywall and polished picture frames. The kind that hums through a house even as the oven breathes cinnamon and clove. I stood in the living room doorway and watched my stepfather hold court at the head of the long table he'd insisted on extending for proper family gatherings, the antique runner aligned like a runway to his chair. The television in the den whispered the game. The radiator gave a thin, metallic hiss. I could smell sage and butter and the black coffee my mother drinks in the afternoon when she wants her hands to stop shaking. Everyone was already seated except me because I'd come home early from campus and made a detour to the bank. And the teller had used the sort of voice you use when you are trained to say, "Bad news," like good weather. The 5 to 9 plan had been emptied in 2 transfers last month. "Authorized," she'd said, tapping the screen with a manicured nail. A custodial signer. My place card was missing from the table. The napkins were folded into those fussy bishop's hats my mother learned from a video. My cousin Jenna was snapping the same photo 3 times for her feed, tilting the phone, biting her lower lip each time as if new angles could invent new lives. The candles were unlit, though the room already smelled faintly of spent matches. On the mantel, the ceramic turkey my father bought at a flea market before he died sat in the exact center, watchful. I put down my bag and the paper folder the branch manager had printed for me, careful to keep the file face down. The leather of the couch was cold against my calf. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear and realized nobody had asked me to sit. My mother saw me and smiled with too many teeth. "Zara, baby," she said, crossing to kiss the air near my cheek. "You made it just in time for Grace. Put your things in your room." "I will in a minute," I said, and looked at the folder. I could feel the weight of the printouts through the cardstock, the familiar texture of a bank logo and barcode, the way every page had its own breath because it carried date, time, and an unblinking ledger. I glanced around for my father's fountain pen blue resin with a hairline cracked near the cap. That he used to sign every school permission slip like it was a treaty. It wasn't on the sideboard where it usually sat in a china bowl with a battery-less remote. A small loop tugged. "Sit, kiddo," said Victor, my stepfather, with his barbecue host voice that made strangers feel like best friends and me feel like a guest. He wore a navy sweater with a quarter zip, the zipper tab flashing like a tooth. He'd moved into our house with his boxes of vintage barware and his habit of tapping a glass before he drank from it, as if to test for cracks. He looked at the file in my hands the way he might look at a strange garnish, something that would melt if he ignored it. "We're starving you out over here." I looked at the place where my name should be and found a blank white card turned backward. Another loop, a small, neat rectangle that couldn't decide who it belonged to. "The bursar emailed," my mother said too quickly. "Did you get your financial aid form squared? I forwarded you something. The login thing, the later." Victor said, gentle but firm, steering the moment away with his palm as if it were a lazy fly. He put a hand on my mother's elbow and applied pressure. There it was, the little squeeze I'd seen him use in front of delivery drivers and neighbors. It meant stop. "Zara knows what she's doing with her numbers." I took the seat at the corner, not at the end, not in the middle, where you can feel every gaze at once. The cushion held a chill. The overhead light buzzed at a pitch I use in the lab to check instrument hum. The smell of rosemary was strong enough to taste. My phone, in my jacket pocket on the back of the chair, vibrated once bank fraud desk voicemail. Second attempt, then stilled. I slid the folder halfway under my plate and looked at the serving bowls like I was cataloging mashed potatoes. Green beans with toasted almonds, cranberry sauce shaped like the can it came in, only sliced into coins like red glass. Victor cleared his throat. "All right," he said, "before we get too hungry to be decent humans, a few words." He smiled, practiced, and warm. "This year has been a lot. Jobs, school, the world doing what the world does. But we are together, and that matters." He nodded toward my mother, who held her breath. "We are building something that can stand. To family." The radiator kicked hard, then softened. The television hissed into a beer commercial with a lot of golden light and grass. I raised my glass of water and did not drink. "To family?" I said. My mouth tasted like metal. "In the next minutes, you'll see how a file folder, a phone call, and an unlit candle can rearrange a room." Zara Aunt Denise cocked her head. She wore a sweater with a pattern of leaves that climbed her sleeves. "You okay?" "I stopped by First Central on the way," I said, letting the sentence sit like a place setting. "Just to get the quarterly statement like I always do when I'm home." I lifted the folder enough to see Victor notice. His smile didn't move, but his left cheek twitched as if a tiny piece of him had decided to leave the room. "We can do grace after." "Of course," my mother said, but her voice was more breath than sound. My cousin Jenna glanced at her phone under the level of the table and mouthed, "Wow." She had grown good at mouthing things when adults were busy. When we were small, we had used the same hiding place in the closet, the Sisterhood of Dust. Victor tapped his fork twice on the table, a little chime. "Zara, honey," he said, using honey the way gym teachers use whistle. "Let's not let paperwork sit in the stuffing. We've got all weekend to do the admin." "It won't take long," I said. Silence unrolled like a ribbon. I opened the folder with the calm of someone who has practiced in a mirror, because I had. My hands were dry, the skin at my knuckles tight in the heat, the oven released every time my mother opened it. The paper was warm from where it had pressed against the plate. The first page was the cover letter the branch manager had printed for me, with my name in the top right corner, the account ending in 1940. The words "Disbursement Activity, O.C. Tinov," and below them, the two transfers, October 18th, $32,400. November 2nd, $31,600. Both outbound, both labeled authorized by custodian. I trailed a finger to the column for authorization method. DocuSign. "Must be a mistake," my mother said in the tone that begged the universe to be kind. Those systems, they always mess up when you travel. It's the VPN. She looked at me like I could conjure a syntax to fix the day. I turned the second page so it faced me. The printout was clean, crisp, the ink a very specific black. The DocuSign certificate IDs were listed like coordinates. I memorized numbers easily. I didn't repeat them aloud because numbers are like spells. Speaking them carelessly changes what they can do. Instead, I lifted the third page, the one that mattered, the copy of the signed authorization. Downloaded from the audit trail the branch manager had escalated to retrieve for me. Because I had asked for the certificate of completion, the IP addresses, the timestamps. The angle of the photocopied signature was slightly upward confident. After the scribble, the typed name, Victor Hale, Custodian. The room pulled in. Sound narrowed until it was only the buzz of the light and the faint sound of my mother's shoe tapping the rung of her chair. The candles on the table stood like empty guards. My father's ceramic turkey watched in profile, patient. "I'm 19, I said, in the same voice I used when I read code aloud to check for missing brackets. "The plan is in my name. My father named my mother as custodian." "Not you." Victor smiled again. And this time I could see his jaw work as he softened it into the expression he used for bad jokes told by men he wanted to hire. "You're absolutely right," he said, palms raised like a preacher caught in a rainstorm. "The custodian designations are fussy. We had to update some things after your mom and I got married. Basic estate hygiene, you know? We signed a durable power back in June to tidy all the household accounts. It was the attorney's recommendation. If there's a misunderstanding on the 529, we'll reverse it." He said reverse like a man who thought he owned verbs if he pronounced them correctly. The oven beeped 3 times. The radiator relaxed a long sigh. I slid the last page from the stack. It was a letter on Chen and Morale's letterhead, dated May 29th, stamped, received, and filed in the corner. Which is a thing lawyers do to remind other lawyers that paper isn't a suggestion. It said exactly what I needed it to. That durable powers of attorney do not change custodianship under a uniform. Transfers to Minors Act account without formal amendment and consent by the original donor or a court order. I'd asked Ms. Chen herself to pull it when she came for coffee last week. I'd told her I wanted to understand what I would be when I turned 21. I had scratched the smell of espresso out of my sweater and brought home a copy, certified and witnessed and countersigned. Now I put it on the table gently. The embossed seal caught the light. "You always have a lawyer for coffee," Jenna whispered, and then looked at her lap as if the whisper had made sound larger than she intended. "I have friends," I said, "and I don't shout. I use process and receipts." Victor leaned back as if the chair had revealed a new limit. "Zara, you know I'm the one who moved the money," he said, soft, a man confessing to eating the last piece of pie. "We bought into that partnership in Highland on the early terms. It was a family decision. All the kids benefit when we build something solid." It was an answer he had practiced. A script line broke the air like a faint smell of ozone before lightning. I looked at my mother. Her lipstick had bled a little into the corners of her mouth. "Mom, I thought it was a loan," she said, each word placed down like a plate that might break. "He said it would come back with interest before spring." He showed me the prospectus. "What prospectus?" I said, and already knew. Another loop tugged. Victor's smile cooled. "There's no problem," he said, which is a sentence that always means there is. "I'll ping the fund manager after dinner and we'll wire back the principal. My account can absorb the carry. You know how these things or wires take a day. Sit down, eat. Let's keep this dignified." "Sage," I said, and let the word float, because the smell had sharpened. "And butter." And the radiator's about to knock again. I folded the folder shut. The paper edges lifted slightly in the dry air and then settled. I reached for my jacket and pulled out my phone. When I opened the banking app, the fonts looked exactly like the paper. The old serif that makes money feel like a church. I navigated to the 529, then 2 security settings. My finger hovered over the freeze option, then fell. The screen asked for a reason. I typed unauthorized custodian transfer pending investigation. It asked if I wanted to notify linked custodians and institutional contact. I checked yes. It asked if I wanted to schedule a call with fraud services. I checked yes. It asked if I wanted to add external counsel. I typed Chen and Morales, file ref. 222529QR. It asked for the code the branch manager had given me in a tiny envelope like a secret you hand to a kid and tell them not to open until they're home. I took the envelope from my pocket and slid out the little slip. The code was 6 numbers, clean. I entered them. The app hummed for 3 seconds. Then a green banner appeared. Account frozen. Escalation ticket. #FC 88217. I felt my shoulders loosen by 1 notch. Victor exhaled a laugh and shook his head. The sound was small and mean. "Come on," he said. "That's theatrics. You just locked your own college fund." "I froze it," I said. "It can be unfrozen. It can also be audited. The audit starts now." The radiator knocked hard as if agreeing. I stood and my chair scraped the wood with a useful sound. In the kitchen, the light was softer and the temperature 7 degrees warmer. I stood by the window near the sink, cracked it open an inch, and breathed the outside air. Leaf and cold and distant smoke. My phone rang with the fraud desk's number and I answered. "This is Zara Ahmed," I said. "Ticket FC 88217. I'm at home. I'll speak freely." The agent was a woman with a calm voice that made you want to confess to an empty room. She asked me to confirm the authentication phrase I'd set on my 17th birthday, my father's middle name, redacted to its first 3 letters. I did. She asked if I wanted a temporary PIN for phone calls and in-branch transactions. I did. She read me the list of authorized contacts on the account. My mother as custodian, me, and a temporary POA holder added in September. 1 Victor Hale. Revocation. She asked. "Revoked," I said, and felt the word leave my mouth like a little bird that knew where to go. "Effective immediately. Please notarize an entry in the log that the POA was issued without donor consent and is suspended pending council review." I looked at the open loop of the missing fountain pen and found its echo in my father's signature on a framed PTA flyer on the wall. The ink had faded to a gentle blue-gray. I'll send a reversal request on both transfers, the agent said. I could hear her typing. We need to notify receiving institutions and the intermediary bank. Do you have wire confirmation numbers? I read them off the page. October 18th, WC 4178884. November 2, WC 4190112. The numbers felt like coordinates again. Like addresses for rooms I could enter if I wanted to see bad furniture. Copy, she said. Reversal initiated. The receiving institution is Old River Brokerage. I'll flag your account for a compliance hold to prevent external outbound until we clear. You'll get a case officer within the hour and a formal log with timestamps. Do you want to add counsel? Please add Ms. Ellen Chen at Chen & Morales, I said, and dictated the email we all have on magnets. And copy Detective Luis Morales, Financial Crimes, Precinct 12. I looked at my mother through the doorway. Her hands were folded on the table like a child in school. Please also add the school bursar's office, I said, and gave Mr. Alvarez's address. They'll need the certification for my spring tuition release. Done, the agent said. One last note. Do you want this call recorded and added to the audit trail? Yes, I said. And please note that I'm at my family home. The custodian in question is present. I'm requesting no contact on the account from his devices for 72 hours pending counsel review. Logged, she said. You'll get an email in 5 minutes with a transcript and case number. Anything else? Can you verify the device IDs used to sign the DocuSign authorizations? I asked IP addresses too. A pause that meant she was escalating. Stand by, she said. I'm pulling the DocuSign certificate of completion. October 18th, IP 73, 1944, 201. Device ID ending in a 7C. November 2nd, IP 73, 1944, 201. Same device ID, location, geocodes to your home address. The house settled in its bones. Someone in the den turned the TV down. The men on screen cheered silently. Thank you, I said. I'll await the email. I closed the line and turned back into the room. Letting the smell of stuffing and heat wash over me like a tide I didn't notice until I stood against it. I laid my phone beside my plate, screen down. Victor had poured himself wine and was swirling it like it held better answers than the ones on the table. My mother stared at the wall over his shoulder the way you stare at a painting that someone told you was valuable. Done, Victor said, eyebrows lifted. Feel better? Process started, I said. Calls recorded, freezes executed, reversals filed, POA revoked, case opened, counsel added. I slipped the notary envelope back into my pocket. I'm hungry. Jenna let out a breath she'd been holding and reached for the potatoes with a hand that shook just enough to rattle the spoon. The metal clicked on ceramic. Aunt Denise looked at Victor and then at the paper, calculation moving quiet as a cat behind her eyes. She said nothing. My mother rubbed her thumb against her other thumb, a habit she used to smooth uncooperative threads. We ate quietly, like people who had learned that noise attracts attention that doesn't help. The turkey was moist. The gravy needed more salt. The radiator, satisfied, fell silent. At some point, the sky outside the kitchen window turned from white to the color of tin. I watched Victor's hands. He set his glass down harder than he meant to. When he noticed, he made a joke about thick oak and strong wrists. His fork scraped his plate once, and he winced, then laughed at himself. A show of lightness, I had learned, means a loss of control. When the plates were cleared and the pie was cut and the coffee machine hissed. I stood and brought the folder to the sideboard. I opened it again because an open loop only closes when everyone sees it close. I removed one more document, a letter addressed to my mother from the Old River Brokerage. Acknowledgement of the incoming wires to a limited partnership called Old River Early Growth Fund 2. LP. The letter listed the general partner's name, Halesbridge Capital LLC. I held my breath at the near rhyme. The kind of coincidence you make on purpose when you want a thing to feel like it belongs to you. The signature at the bottom was from the fund administrator, on e-sign with the name J. Enright. Victor, I said, still in that same calm voice. Do you have the subscription documents? The risk disclosures. The executed LP agreement. He smiled as if the question were a novelty. It's a Reg D private placement, he said. I did the whole stack through my guy. It's real, Zara. You're not the first college kid to wonder where the grown-ups keep the keys. I tapped the acknowledgement letter with my finger. Then we'll need to see them. The admin will have to certify that the incoming wires were not misappropriated funds. Old River's compliance will be very eager to return money if there's a sniff of UTMA conversion without consent. There's case law, I added, because there is always case law and I carry it around like an emergency kit. If they want to be enjoined, they can drag their feet. Antonise coughed a small bark. We can talk about this after company, she said to the air. We are a company, I said, and looked at my mother. Mom, I need you to say something for the record. Did you authorize Victor to transfer my college fund? Her eyes traveled the space between us as if it were a field she'd once crossed in a different season. She lifted her chin, then lowered it again, then lifted it once more, like a bird deciding if the sky was safe. I didn't understand, she said at last, voice low. I signed something because I thought it was to let him help. I didn't know this would happen. She looked at Victor, not at me. I didn't know. I nodded. Thank you. Victor stood. He adjusted his sweater like it had surprised him. All right, he said. Enough. We're not doing a courtroom at the table. If you want to perform, take it to the living room. I'll get the documents and you'll see that this is a family investment that benefits everyone. Then we will all apologize to each other like adults and move on. I let him lead because sometimes it is important to let someone build their own witness stand. The living room was cooler than the dining room. The air had the faint smell of furniture polish and the old rug that my mother refused to replace because my father's knees had pressed into it every time he took a box out of the attic. Victor stood by the coffee table and opened his laptop. The screen's glow lit his face from below, making a weak ghost of him. He clicked through a folder called Finance, then one called Deals, then one called HBC, then one called LP Docs. He selected a PDF and turned the screen to me with a flourish. There, he said. I took my phone out and opened the camera, then stopped. I won't photograph, I said. I will read. I moved closer, the leather of the couch graining under my palm. The PDF was a standard subscription booklet with the usual density of words. I scanned for the field I needed and found it. Limited partner name. Not Halesbridge. Not Victor. Not my mother. Not me. It was a family trust I'd never heard of. The Whitcomb Education and Opportunity Trust. The trustee, Victor Hale. The beneficiary descriptions were generic issue of settler by blood or marriage. The lines where our names would be listed were blank. I looked up at him. He watched my face, not the screen. He didn't flinch, which is its own kind of movement. Who's Whitcomb? I asked. A friend, he said too fast. Legacy Trust. We're piggybacking. The radiator in the living room ticked back to life, one tap as if a spoon had touched its ribs. I reached into my pocket and brought out my father's old keyring. The metal was cool and smelled faintly of whatever machines touch. One of the keys was to the old desk in the den. The one Victor had locked on his second week in our house and declared a safety hazard because of the warped drawer. I twirled the key on the ring and let it click against the others like a tiny bell. That desk still has the safe drawer. I said to the room. Victor laughed, indulgent. This is getting dramatic, he said. Do you want to search the house for secrets, too? Yes, said a voice from the doorway, and I turned to see Ms. Chen, calm as ever, her coat still on, her scarf catching a thin thread of light from the kitchen. And I brought someone who enjoys searching. Behind her, Detective Morales lifted a hand in a little wave. I blinked and laughed, a small, surprised sound that tasted like relief. You made good time, I said. You texted a picture of a letter that made my neck itch. Ms. Chen said, cool. And your case email pinged both of our phones. We were already on our way to my sister's. We decided to stop in. She looked at my mother, then at Victor, polite as iced tea. We can be guests or we can be counsel. We tend to be better as counsel. Victor stood straighter. He was good at straightening when important people entered rooms. Ellen, he said, fake familiar. You know, this is a misunderstanding. We have all the documents. We'll reverse the wires. Lovely, Ms. Chen said. Then we'll need to preserve your devices, your document folders, and the safe drawer in the den. She turned to Detective Morales. Would you do the honors? Morales nodded and produced a small gray case like a magician doing a trick. Inside were tamper-evident bags, seals, a portable drive, a notary log. He smelled faintly of cedar and dryer sheets. We'll image the laptop and your phone, Mr. Hale, he said. Voluntary is the friendly way. Involuntary is the other way. Which flavor? Victor's mouth stretched into a smile he couldn't make reach his eyes. Voluntary, he said, and handed over the laptop like you hand over a warm pewter plate to a person who has the right gloves. Ms. Chen moved through the room without touching anything more than necessary. She examined the fireplace mantel, then the pictures, then the desk. Key? She asked, without turning. I held up the ring and walked to the den. The air in there was cooler, with a faint smell of dry paper and the ghost of the cologne my father used. The lamp was off. I turned it on and the shade flickered twice before holding. I inserted the key into the desk's side drawer, felt it bite, then turn. The drawer stuck and then gave with a soft sigh, revealing a shallow safe wall in the back that slid out when you pressed it exactly at the little nick by the top corner. My father had shown me that when I was 12, the same day he taught me how to fold a fitted sheet. Behind the panel was a thin leather folder and a small velvet pouch. The leather folder held the last will my father signed when he knew he was dying. The paper was crisp and smelled faintly of vanilla from the boxes it had slept in. I opened to the clause that mattered because I had found it once when I couldn't sleep, a bequest and an instruction, simple and clear, that any funds designated for my education could not be converted to non-educational purposes by any custodian or successor in interest without my written consent after age 18. Witnessed by 2 disinterested parties or court authorized. It even listed account numbers. My father's lawyer had been thorough. I felt the air thin and cool against my cheeks. The velvet pouch held the fountain pen. I lifted it and it felt heavier than memory. I uncapped it and the nib gleamed with a fine line of blue. The pen smelled like ink and something like smoke. I walked back to the living room with the will and the pen. Ms. Chen took the will, scanned the clause, and nodded once. The nod she uses when she is filing something in her mind where she can always find it. This will do, she said. Victor laughed, short like a bark. A will isn't a banking authorization, he said. We're mixing apples and subpoenas. Apples still fall, Morales said, and wrote something in his notebook without looking up. What I don't understand, Aunt Denise said from the doorway, is why all of this had to happen at dinner. Because time is a tool, I said, and the words came out without edge. And because in some houses, paper has to be read before pie, or it never gets read at all. My phone buzzed. The email subject line was simple and full. Case assigned. FC 88217 primary contact. A. Patel, Senior Fraud Analyst. The body of the email was a log of the call with the actions taken, the reversal requests sent, the notations recorded, the IP addresses documented. At the bottom, 2 lines. Temporary restraint on custodial contacts. Hale. Victor. Notification sent to registered emails and devices. The email, CCDMs, Chen, Detective Morales, and the bursar. The line under the CCS was my favorite kind of line. This message has been time-stamped, certified, and recorded. Victor's phone lit on the mantel, buzzed twice, lay still. He didn't pick it up. My mother stepped into the living room and pressed her palm flat to the doorframe like she needed the wood to hold her up. I didn't know, she said again, but this time she aimed it at the air, not at a person. I didn't know what I was signing. Ms. Chen softened, just enough. You'll make a statement, she said. We'll notarize it. We'll attach the will, the bank log, the DOCA signed certificates, and the Old River acknowledgement. We'll send a letter to Old River rescinding any authorization that depended on a defective. POA, We'll cite the UTMA language and your husband's clause. We'll give them 24 hours to identify a return path. If they don't comply, we'll serve them and copy the SEC regional office for educational purposes. Educational, Morales repeated, amused. He zipped Victor's laptop into a bag that made a whispering sound like leaves. Jenna leaned in the doorway, then, eyes wide the way they get when the day refuses to be a day and becomes a story. Do you need me to do anything? She asked, trying to sound casual and hitting earnest instead. Yes, I said. Turn the candles on. She struck a match. The scent was phosphor, quick and dry, then the softer fat smell of wax, surrendering to heat. The room shifted with the light, faces redrawn in warmer pencils. The living room looked smaller, as it does when truth enters it, like breath makes a cold room tolerable, but not larger. Victor picked up his phone, then glanced at the screen, and set it down again with the care of someone handling a loaded object. He looked at me with a hollowing of the eyes that I hadn't seen before. It was the look of a man who has lost an argument he thought he'd scripted. His mouth twisted once, then set. So that's how it is, he said. You want your college money? Fine, you can have it. We'll unwind the investment. You can pay your tuition and your fees and your whatever. He gestured at my phone. But don't come to me next year when you want help with a deposit on your first apartment. Don't come to me when your car dies. Don't come to me for I won't, I said quietly. I know the cost. And I heard you. He smiled again, and this time it was the smile he used when he told jokes in the garage to men who laughed too hard at nothing. You know what my father used to say? He asked. If you want to be in the family, you play by the family rules. I held his gaze. Seems I'm not family after all. The words hung for a second, then found the shelf I had built for them, early and sturdy. The radiator gave a single surprised tick. We spent the next hour doing what adults do when a holiday becomes paperwork. Ms. Chen drafted a rescission letter on her tablet. Stylus moving like a surgeon's hand. She read each line aloud, and I initialed where she tapped. She added the will's language, the bank's case number, the DOCA-signed certificate IDs, the IP addresses, the receiving institution details. I watched the timestamp update in the corner of the app with each revision. I liked how the seconds recorded themselves, a tiny train of proof. Morales bagged Victor's phone and handed him a receipt on a pre-printed form that looked both banal and powerful. He recorded chain of custody on his body cam with a voice I could imagine reading vows. My mother wrote a statement in her small, neat hand, the script she learned from nuns, her wrist rolling gently. Ms. Chen had me and Aunt Denise witness the signature. Then she notarized it from the traveling notary stamp she kept in her purse like a talisman. We served the rescission letter together. Ms. Chen sent it electronically to the admin at Old River. Attached the case log, CC'd the general partner's compliance address, and then printed a copy from our dying home printer that groaned like an old ship. Morales slipped the letter into a certified mail envelope, filled out the green return receipt card with careful block letters, and pressed the gummed edge with his thumb. I like mail, he said. It builds character. When we were done, the room felt warmer, both from the work and from the candles that Jenna had relit twice because she liked the ritual of match and wick and flame. I held my father's pen and felt the hairline crack under my thumb. I did not try to fix it. Some cracks are part of the object's work. Victor sat on the edge of the couch as if he were poised to stand and didn't know when. The silence had changed. It wasn't the hush of people avoiding truth, but the pause of a machine that has been turned off and is cooling. The smell faintly like ozone and victory and something else. Are we done? Aunt Denise asked, not unkindly. For tonight, Ms. Chen said. Tomorrow we'll talk to Old River. If they're smart, they'll act before breakfast. If they're not, they'll learn. Compliance is a hungry animal. Morales smiled into his notebook. I love when you do that voice, he said. My mother sat beside me and touched the edge of the will with a fingertip. Your father, she said, and stopped. The house held the sentence for her. We'll make tea, I said, and put the pie away. We'll make lunch from it tomorrow. We'll let the house be small tonight. Sleep that night felt like walking from one room to another in the dark, and knowing where the furniture used to be. I woke twice to the sound of my phone pinging. First, reply from Old River's admin acknowledging receipt of the rescission and promising internal review in the morning. Second, a note from the bank with a new subject line: reversal confirmation request, sent response required by 10 a.m. The emails were time-stamped 11:14 p.m. and 2:03 a.m., like the hours that decide whether a story is complicated or over. In the morning, the sun came thin and white through the kitchen window, and the tile was cold under my bare feet. The scent of coffee was eager. Ms. Chen arrived again in a sweater with a cowl neck and the same cool eyes. Morales came an hour later with a box of pastries and a grin. Victor stayed in the bedroom. The door was closed. The sound of drawers opening and closing drifted thinly down the hall. At 9:42 a.m., Old River called us. The fund administrator, a woman named Enright, whose voice on the phone was both brisk and nervous, said their internal counsel had reviewed our letter, noted the UTMA language and the will clause, and had recommended immediate return of the 2 wires pending documentation of the return path. "We're not admitting liability," she said, "because that is the sort of sentence that shows up on slides. We're acting to avoid harm." Ms. Chen put her on speaker and recorded the call, then read a short paragraph slowly, with dates, times, and exactly who we all were. She asked Enright to confirm receipt and intention. She did. Ms. Chen asked for wire confirmations for the return. Enright, read the numbers. Morales wrote them in his notebook with a pencil and underlined once. I watched my mother watch the door to the bedroom and then stop watching, a decision made in her hands before her mouth. At 10:13 a.m., the bank emailed, "Reversal confirmations received, funds returned to 529 account, CASE. FC 88217 status. Closed, pending final report." The numbers were whole again. I exhaled a laugh without meaning to. My shoulders recognized the shape of gravity they liked better. Victor emerged at noon with a suitcase. He did not meet my eyes. He set the suitcase by the door and put on his coat in the slow movements of someone assembling a story in his head. "I'll be at a hotel for a few days," he said into the foyer. "We can discuss terms like adults when people are calm." Ms. Chen looked at my mother, then at me. "Not today," she said. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. For a second, I saw a boy trying to borrow a father's coat. Then it was gone. He picked up the suitcase and walked out into the thin sunlight, the November air catching at the edge of his coat like it wanted to keep something. The door clicked shut, the final punctuation of a sentence we had written together without agreeing to. The public stage had always been our living room. The reckoning had played clean, with receipts, like stamps. That night we ate leftovers in bowls on the couch, our knees touching because space is elastic when you're tired. Jenna scrolled through her phone and then put it face down on the coffee table like a symbol. Aunt Denise made a TSK sound at a stain on the cushion and then sat on it. Because some stains you sit on to make them less important. Ms. Chen texted me links to a template for revoking household passwords and an article on how to do an inventory for insurance without sobbing. Morales sent me a picture of his dog wearing a scarf. The radiator hummed at a lower, friendlier pitch. The candles on the mantel had tunneled down into themselves. I went to the den and tidied the desk, which still smelled like paper and old ink. I replaced the velvet pouch and the will and locked a drawer. I took the fountain pen with me. I stood in the doorway and looked at the family pictures. In one, my father held me over his head and I squinted as if the world were too bright. In another, my mother wore a dress she would never wear now and looked at the camera as if it had asked her a polite question. In the weeks that followed, the ripples behaved like ripples always do. They found edges and surprised them. Old River revised its subscription protocols. I got a bland email with a bolded subheading that read "Policy Update, Custodial Accounts," and laughed so loud I scared the cat I didn't have. The bank sent me the final fraud report with the word "complied" in 4 places and the phrase "reversed funds" in 6. The school bursar emailed a single line: "Balance settled. See you in January." My mother found a therapist who looked like a woman on a book jacket and started using words like "after." boundary, and later in sentences that didn't also have please and sorry. She signed a short letter. Ms. Chen drafted that delineated who could use what passwords and who paid what bills and where the spare keys lived. We recorded it with the county clerk because even domestic life deserves a docket number. Victor found a new apartment. He sent my mother an email with a subject line that read, "Parting," and a body that reviewed who would pick up the remainder of his barware and whether we had seen a cufflink shaped like a knot. Ms. Chen forwarded the email to me with a single line, "Please archive." Morales called once to say hello and once to tell me that the chain of custody on the devices had turned up nothing more interesting than texts with an old college friend about golf and a folder of PDFs named important. He also told me he'd gotten a new pencil sharpener. He was pleased about it. It made a mess in a very specific way. Jenna asked me to help her write a cover letter for an internship at the art museum. We sat in the kitchen with a bowl of oranges and wrote sentences that tried to look like her. She looked at the mantel and said, "I still can't believe you froze your own account at dinner." I said, "It was dessert." We both laughed until we cried. We got the candles out again and lit them. It made the room look as if it had been waiting for us. The last time the signature line visited me, it did it quietly. I was at school in January, sitting on the floor of my dorm room because the carpet felt warmer than the bed, reading career pages and a course syllabus and a letter from my mother that smelled like her drawer. The window let in a rectangle of pale light that warmed my knees. I wrote the sentence on an index card and tucked it under the glass on my desk, not as a wound, but as a tool. Seems I'm not family after all. It was different now. It meant something like, I can choose who sits at my table. The pen wrote smoother after I had it serviced. The crack was still there, small and clean, a reminder that tension has edges. I used it to sign a small lease on a room I could afford without asking anyone's permission. I used it to sign a form that let me be the only custodian of my own things once I turned 21. I used it to jot a list of groceries that included rosemary because I had forgiven it. If you read this and see your own table in it, borrow the calm and the verbs. Freeze what needs freezing. File what needs filing. And if you know someone who needs this, pass it along so they don't eat in silence.